I want you to picture the version of yourself when you were 12 years old. At this age, a lot of us were just entering 7th grade, trying to find our voices, and just starting to get a grip on who we were. I still remember sitting with my iPad one day at this age and typing furiously as my hands shook with disbelief. I refused to look back at the question I had put in the Google search bar as I scrolled hungrily through the endless void of articles and quizzes. The amount of BuzzFeed quizzes I took that day and the past few was immense. Finally, I had to face the fact that the only one who could offer the answer to my question about my sexuality was myself. And I did, eventually. The day I finally accepted my bisexuality was one of relief, clarity, and tragic fear. I had discovered a true and beautiful part of myself that was an undeniable piece to the puzzle of who I was and who I am. At age 12, though, I immediately sought validation from the things that brought me joy, like movies, books, and video games. Through these forms of entertainment that were handed to me, a whole world painted itself in my head, one seemingly perfect and organized with distinguished types of people and their different ways of life. But as I played and searched, all I found was Mario and Peach, Link and Zelda. Not once did I find a normalized romantic relationship that wasn't between a male character and a female character in the games that I spent so much time playing. As I watched and played these games, I automatically related their characters and stories to the reality I lived in, and let it influence my perspective of the world around me, just as movies and books had a similar influence. It was only a matter of time before I fell into the trap of the harmful question, is there something wrong with me, and am I broken? I quickly found that I wasn't alone. Without LGBTQ+ representation in video games, other young people had begun to question the validity of their identity as well. This representation in gaming is crucial and incredibly influential in helping queer youth understand that their identity is valid and never a part of themselves to feel ashamed of. I had sent out a survey to students ranging from ages 14 to 22 and a couple of educators who identify as part of the LGBTQ+ community. I asked them questions such as, why does queer representation matter to you, and where have you seen the most representation? Along with a few others pertaining to their identity and also their passion for video games if they had one. Quite honestly, I was blown away by the openness and sincerity that came with each response. We all knew what it felt like to feel lost in our identity. As I read these responses, one answer that stood out to me came from one of the youngest surveyees and wrote, "Not seeing more representation has made me feel wrong at times, like I almost shouldn't exist." As I read on, more and more of these individuals admitted to feeling weird and hurt when they couldn't see themselves represented, while on the other hand, they said they felt seen and welcome into the world when they could. For some, they even expressed that this representation was the biggest factor in finding their self-acceptance, as celebrities and characters on screen were the only queer role models available to them. When asked where they find the most representation, the responses overwhelmingly included books, movies, and even music. But where are video games? Just a few years ago, Games Radar Plus's Sam Gear went on an online expedition to discover how many games she could find featuring queer characters. Out of the more than 1 million games that exist in the world, her count came out to 179. Out of that 179, only 83 had queer characters that were playable. And out of that 83, only 8 have a default main character who identifies as queer. 8. It is no surprise that not a single survey mentioned mainstream video games as a source of representation. There are close to none. The industry heavily lacks games including characters with identities reflecting this community, a community that in reality makes up more than 10% of gamers, according to a Nielsen study. Another major issue in this discussion is the way in which LGBTQ+ identities and relationships are presented. A strong example of this is the all-too-common optional representation. Take the new upcoming game Hogwarts Legacy, for example. It has been announced that it will include transgender characters. This is great. However, as we look closer, this representation is only a part of the game if the gamer chooses to create a transgender main character. In other words, though it is a noteworthy step in the right direction to include this option, it is still completely up to the gamer to put in the work. Another example of this can be found in games such as The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, where queer characters such as the Hunter are included, but only if the gamer chooses a specific path of conversation in the storyline. Again, this inclusion is of course an incredibly important step, but the lack of default representation as a whole in gaming leads to a dangerous effect called symbolic annihilation. Symbolic annihilation can be defined as the underrepresentation of a group that directly contributes to the maintaining of social inequality. Without the representation of minority groups, including LGBTQ+ identities, games easily contribute to a gamer's perception of their society and the people that live within it, and make it dangerously inaccurate. We simply cannot continue to leave out or hide these identities in the games we play if we wish to promote empathy, equity, and equality in the real world. Let's look back at the survey I talked about a little earlier. When asked why video games are important to them, many surveys said gaming offer a way to connect with their friends or team, meet new people, or just to release and have fun. We now know that games can have an even larger impact as well. When asked if they believed the inclusion of more LGBTQ+ identities in video games would be beneficial for queer youth as another opportunity to see themselves represented, 100% answered yes. The inclusion of more of these characters promotes self-acceptance and confidence in queer youth, helping them to reach the important realization that their identity will always be valid and one to embrace. I have watched my queer friends point at these rare characters in video games and celebrate not only the chance to see someone similar, but to see themselves, an experience that encourages queer youth to celebrate this aspect of their identity as they cheer for admired and relatable characters on screen. This change is possible. If you are a game developer or simply enjoy creating and coding, I strongly encourage you to consider including more characters of minority groups such as the LGBTQ+ community into your work, specifically as default main characters. If you're not so strong with computer science or simply have other interests, I suggest you support this change through directing your money and voice. Talk to your friends, talk to your family, express your support on social media. If able, be sure to purchase any fun games that feature queer characters. We have the undeniable power to shift the industry through the games we purchase, and as human beings have the undeniable power to educate the minds around us by spreading awareness on the issue. With our combined efforts, we can finally create a gaming industry and culture that promotes a truer reflection of who we are, one that allows us to see ourselves not only in another virtual world, but in our own reality and human experience.